Welcome back to the Rum Ration, the podcast where we toast the extraordinary courage and enduring selflessness of combatants worldwide. I'm Colin.
And I'm Rejoy. And before we begin, I just want to apologize to everyone. I've got a bit of a cold. So if I'm coughing, sneezing, blowing my nose, and behaving in an undignified manner, you should be used to it.
I don't think anyone will be able to tell the difference. And,
No,
and
the
we,
way-
should specify it's probably a man cold, so it means it's really the end of the world.
It is.
Yeah.
I've been suffering
I
terribly.
presume the ambulance is on its way.
Called 3 times, but 911 in Toronto is, I'm sure you've heard the stories. But Colin, we've just passed Remembrance Day and November 11th, a time where you see the red poppy all over the country. And it's a time that we take to sort of reflect upon the sacrifices, the immense sacrifices that our servicemen and women have made in conflicts from time immemorial. But this year, instead of just talking about Remembrance Day, I'm sure there are many people who are, and that is a subject that perhaps we'll cover in a future episode. Let's dive into something a little bit different that you and I want to talk about, the symbol that defines it all, the humble red poppy.
That's right. And it's a great episode because of the fact that there's so many people who don't really understand the origin story behind it. And it's one of those symbols that a lot of us presume we are all aware of, and we presume where it comes from and what it does. But I think some people might be surprised. I think you're a little bit surprised by some of the research that we did.
Yeah. Very surprised. Didn't expect it at all.
And I think, as you and I are both former infantry officers ourselves, we understand the great symbols often spring from very simple origins, connecting the visceral reality of the front line with the deep need for memory back home. And the story of the poppy, I just love it. It's a testament to how ordinary individuals, very international, a Canadian doctor, an American academic, and a tireless French humanitarian, it's kind of like, a rabbi, a Jew, and a plumber walk into a bar, and how they all created an enduring legacy.
I think that's the thing that I found so fascinating. Of course, being familiar with the poppy and the poppy campaign for most of our teen and adult lives, I always equated it simply with a tradition that was very Commonwealth with Canada and Great Britain. But in your notes, you bring up the fact that it's a Canadian doctor. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But an American academic and a French humanitarian. So that took me completely by surprise.
Everyone who's got their elbows up right now, might be a little bit shocked to find out the Americans were actually using the poppy as a symbol before we were.
Yeah, exactly, which is incredible. So it's really going to be interesting to dive into this. So today we're going to unpack the origins of the story, the global spread, and the surprising differences in how the major English-speaking veteran associations and organizations, and by that I mean Canada, Britain, and the U.S., now run their poppy campaigns. This is really the history of remembrance distilled, much like
and I think
Rum Ration podcast.
That's right. And distilled 100 proof at least.
100 proof.
One of the things I think is going to surprise a lot of listeners, particularly those who are not involved in the veteran community, is they probably see veterans as one homogeneous organization or job.
Very true.
Not at all. And we'll get into that. It's if you think it's shattered and disparate now, it was even more so at the beginning. So let's get into it, speaking of the beginning. And we'll start with some context on just how powerfully evocative the poppy as a symbol of remembrance was already becoming even before the end of the First World War. So if you think back, April 1918, 7 months before the war actually ended, and let's face it, no one who was in the war at the time thought the war would end in 1918.
No, that's right.
They were hoping best case 1919, probably 1920. Plans were being made for 21-22.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
The Allies, of course, in April 18 were still reeling from the shocking advances made by the Germans on the Western Front all throughout March 1918, where the Germans came very close to ending the war. And then you had a little newspaper in Toronto called The Globe, which is now known as the Globe and Mail, and all those of us outside of Toronto like to lovingly refer to it as Toronto's national newspaper. Of course, it declared that the famous flower, the poppy, was, quote, one real rival to the maple leaf as a possible national emblem, end quote. Yeah, imagine that. Bear that in mind the next time someone scoffs at the importance of Vimy Ridge or the Canadian Expeditionary Force being formative elements of Canadian national identity. Now, I will get off my soapbox and we can get back to our regularly scheduled podcast.
Rant over.
Rant over.
So for that, let's get some context into this and go into the backstory, because to understand the poppy, we really have to go back to the Western Front during the First World War, and that region of Western Europe was it was desolate, wasn't it? And repeatedly shelled, fought over. We have these stark images when you look at pictures from the time from the front and movie reels, shattered trees.
And the war paintings. The paintings
war
were so
paintings.
evocative, yeah.
Oh, I mean, it just takes you right there. And you look at this place and you think it's unbelievable how anything could survive there. A barren, mud, bleak, desolate scene where little could grow.
But nature, of course, in its relentless way, would provide a striking exception, the bright red Flanders poppies. And these resilient flowers flourished amid the chaos and destruction, often growing literally in the thousands and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, because they're basically a weed. And the sources tell us that the artillery bombardments severely disrupted the chalk soils, and this action actually enriched them with lime from the rubble, making it extremely fertile, creating the perfect conditions for the poppy seeds to germinate and bloom. And I've been talking to a couple of schools this year as part of Remembrance Week. One of the things I try to get across to the students is, if you're a Canadian and you came over and you're serving in Flanders and you saw, particularly in the springtime, like, the Second Battle of Ypres, end of April, early May, and suddenly, all these poppies are blooming everywhere. Well, the locals there don't understand why we get all teary-eyed and misty about it, and why it's so important to us, because it would be like for us seeing dandelions everywhere. Because the poppy is basically a weed that grows up everywhere. Yeah. But if they were yellow, we would go, oh, okay, that's just like back in Canada, dandelions. But for them, it's a weed growing everywhere. So the soil's getting turned over by the shells. It's all fresh, and it's all been enriched, and it's all being mixed up. So yeah, it's a perfect breeding ground. And of course, you can understand, if you've just seen so many young men being mowed down and blood being spilled everywhere, the red would obviously be an evocative, powerful symbol for you.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it is quite striking, especially seeing a field of poppies. It's quite a sight, a very powerful image, and it's great how you put that, Colin. The fact that despite this barren landscape, it is a weed and it continues to grow. Its life stubbornly taking root over the graves of the fallen.
Nice.
And interestingly, this link between battlefield and poppies wasn't new. So for us, it's new, but it goes back in time. Records indicate that poppies bloomed over soldiers' graves in Flanders as far back as the Napoleonic Wars in the 19th century. And, well, there's also, let's not even get into Afghanistan and the poppy story there. Yeah. Whole different context.
A little bit more of a revenue stream than the poppy. A little more economic value.
Well, there's always going to be that aspect to everything.
That's right. So. To be clear, I don't think the poppies in Flanders would do you much good if you're trying to create a bunch of heroin.
No, I don't think so.
Back to Flanders, it took a Canadian soldier and a physician to immortalize the image of the poppy. And we're talking about, of course, Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. McCrae was born in Guelph, Ontario, and he had served as a gunner, as an artillery officer, in the South African War about 15 years prior. And he was a professor of medicine before he enlisted right at the start of First World War.
Yeah, that's right. And in May 1915, he was serving as the brigade surgeon in an artillery brigade during the horrific Second Battle of Ypres, which we've covered in previous podcasts. And again, if you're interested in that, please go back and listen to those episodes, because they are absolutely shocking, what took place there. And so McCrae spent 17 days caring for the wounded and performing surgery on Allied troops. The sheer scale of the toll, with an astonishing estimated 70% of the Canadian Expeditionary Force combatants eventually becoming casualties. Imagine that, 70%.
70.
That's crazy. That must have weighed heavily on him, especially as a surgeon.
70%, and you were not exactly signed up for... You were signed up for the duration. You weren't signed up.
That's right.
It wasn't a tour like when I went to Bosnia. I knew I'd go home in 7 months.
Not the Vietnam thing. You've got a year in, and then you're packing out. You're there for the whole time, till it ends.
Yeah, and you and I, of course, as former officers, we know that connection with your troops, that sense of shared destiny, it's everything. And the sources emphasize that the soldiers' greatest motivation for action was often, of course, comradeship and duty.
Yes.
And when McCrae's close friend and fellow soldier was killed, the emotional impact was profound.
Indeed. Well, that brings us directly to our catalyst.
That's right.
The
This
spark.
catalyst would have been the spark here was the sight of those resilient red flowers blooming on the graves of the recently fallen, coupled with the immediate grief of losing a friend. That moved Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae to action. And I got to say, I did a little bit more research for this, and kind of like our unofficial motto of the Rum Ration podcast, where we don't let facts get in the way of a good story, there are at least 3 competing origin stories for when John McCrae actually wrote the poem. And all have their own source and cited and all specific. And of course, you and I being as biased as we are towards the Royal Montreal Regiment, obviously there's the RMR does play a part in one of those origin stories.
Has to.
Which would have been Francis Scrimger, the first Victoria Cross holder, who apparently is the one who convinced because they were buddies, convinced McCrae to actually send it in for publication on Punch. But who knows? We never let facts get in the way of a good story, right?
But we do know that the Scrimger story is the actual one.
Of course.
That's what actually happened. But okay.
Yeah, but the poem, we do know that the poem was written following the funeral of a close friend and a fellow soldier, a gentleman by the name of Lieutenant Alexei Helmer, who died in the battle. On May 3rd, 1915, McCrae was inspired to write his famous poem, In Flanders Field, because his friend, Alexei Helmer, who was a 22-year-old from Ottawa, Ontario, had been killed on an early Sunday morning on May 2nd, so just a day prior. And ironically, as a gunner, poor old Helmer, he was killed by artillery fire, and sadly is one of the many, many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, who sadly has no known grave, which, spoiler alert, is something we'll be talking about in a future episode that Rejoy's put together for us. And Helmer's name, amongst so many others, is commemorated on the Menin Gate in Ypres.
Yeah, and seeing those names is, it really hits home, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah.
So the poem immediately captured the imagination of the Allies, especially as it was written from the perspective of the dead soldiers themselves, which is an interesting take on it. I think that's what also grabs me every time I read it. And of course, it famously opens, "In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row." Just those first 2 lines grab you right from the get-go. Don't they? So it was first published in the London-based magazine Punch, which is a very famous publication of especially the 19th and early 20th century, and it was published on December 8th, 1915.
And we just had, of course, if people go back to our prior episode, the one just immediately previous to this one, they can get an amazing rendition of it by Canada's former parliamentary poet laureate, George Eliot, and he did a phenomenal reading of that.
Yeah, George Eliot Clark is an incredible speaker, isn't he? And we were just riveted by his rendition of that. It was incredible.
Yeah. But the poem, it wasn't just mournful, though. It also contained a powerful call to action. And the final verse implores the living to, quote, "take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high," end quote. And this language of holding the torch high, of continuing the fight. He's not giving up here. It's not it's not pity. It really resonated deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. It's saying, okay, our part in this act is over. You need to carry it on.
That's right. To the end.
To the end. Now, what really caught me by surprise is this part now that we're going to talk about. A pivotal figure was an American academic named Moina Michael. And that, of course, hit me completely by surprise.
Yeah.
We go from John McCrae's poem, which is what I always connected the Poppy campaign with, to now an American academic. And she was a professor at the University of Georgia who volunteered for the American YMCA Overseas War Secretaries Organization. So that's a mouthful right there in itself. So in 1918, she was inspired by McCrae's poem, and she wrote her own response titled, "We Shall Keep the Faith."
That's right. Michael was so moved that she vowed to wear a red poppy permanently as a symbol of remembrance for those who had served. And she began campaigning to have the poppy adopted as an official national symbol across the United States. And this action directly led to the poppy being adopted as a memorial flower of the American Legion family on September 27th, 1920, at their convention in Cleveland, Ohio. So imagine that. You know, we just mentioned earlier that in April 1918, you had the Globe in Toronto who was arguing that the poppy could become the national symbol for Canada, and here you are in the United States. You've got someone campaigning and the American Legion bringing it on as the official symbol of remembrance already in 1920.
So there already you have that connection.
Yeah.
Very unexpected. But this is where the story gets really complicated, because making the poppy a widespread global symbol required more than just poetry and idealism. It needed a logistical mastermind.
Yeah, someone with a real talent for organizing and a ton of energy. And that master organizer was a French woman named Anna Guérin. But first, a word from our fantasy sponsor for this episode, Flanders Field Flask Strength Rum, the only spirit guaranteed to keep your poppy upright, even when you're not.
Ah, yes. Distilled with reverence and bottled with the clear understanding that no one sips this stuff slowly.
Pairs well with quiet reflection and loud, slurred opinions about military strategy.
Flanders Field Flask Strength Rum, lest we forget what happened after the second glass.
Loud, slurred opinions. Yeah, I've heard a fair amount of those in my time.
Oh, yes, indeed. And they will continue on. So on to the global adoption. So Anna Guérin, born Anna Alex Boule in France in 1878, was already an extraordinary woman. She'd been a teacher and a lecturer, spending time in Madagascar and promoting French culture in London. So when World War I began in 1914, she established a charity to support French widows and orphans.
Mm-hmm. And she took her promotional tours, including theatrical shows about famous French women, to the United States. And since the U.S. was neutral initially, she focused her talks discreetly on French history, but openly raised funds for French war causes.
Yeah, that's the way you do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was inspired by Moina Michael's idea of the poppy as a memorial flower. So she expanded the concept into her original Inter-Allied Poppy Day, an idea for all World War I Allied countries to use artificial poppies made by French widows and orphans as an emblem of remembrance, and crucially as a method for raising funds to support the families of the fallen.
These artificial poppies, I think they were making them out of silk originally. And she became so well known for this tireless advocacy that she was christened the Poppy Lady from France. And when she addressed the American Legion Convention in Cleveland in September 1920, that's how they introduced her.
So Guérin was instrumental in conducting the very first nationwide poppy drive in the world during the week before America's Memorial Day, what they call Decoration Day.
Yeah.
In May 1921. So these poppies were French-made, crafted by the widows and children her charity supported. So I guess no tariffs in those days.
Now, we try to stay apolitical here. But I think a lot of people will be surprised to know that the very first poppy campaign was run in the United States using French-made poppies. Nothing to do with the Commonwealth, nothing to do with Canada, nothing to do with the UK. So I think
that's really interesting, isn't it?
A little surprising for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But of course, the American adoption wasn't seamless. The American Legion soon proved skeptical, favoring the daisy, which was indigenous to the U.S. You gotta make daisies great again, over the poppy. And so the Legion briefly adopted the daisy, leading to Daisy Days. It wasn't until 1922 that the American Legion repudiated the daisy and permanently adopted the poppy.
Just doesn't have that same pull to it, does it?
No.
Daisy Days. I don't know Daisy Days. I don't know. Meanwhile, Guérin was busy spreading the idea throughout the Commonwealth. So Canada was next, and on July 4th, 1921, good day to do that, I think. She spoke to the men of the Great War Veterans Association in Port Arthur, Ontario, which is now Thunder Bay. So the Great War Veterans Association, or the GWVA, adopted the Inter-Allied Poppy Day idea on July 6th, 1921, making them the first British Empire Veterans Association to do so.
Interesting. So U.S. was first, Canada was second.
Canada was second.
So the Great War Veterans Association was the most prominent of the Canadian veteran organizations formed after World War I, and its aims, established in 1917, were multifaceted. It was to perpetuate the close ties of mutual service, to maintain the dignity and honor among returned soldiers, preserve the memory of the dead, remembrance, and ensure proper provision like pensions, unemployment benefits, medical care, housing, all that kind of stuff for the sick, wounded, and needy, as well as their dependents. Because it's important to notice that for listeners that there was no such thing as Veterans Affairs at the time. And these soldiers came home and were just kind of on their own.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
right.
the Great War Veterans Association provided crucial leadership among veteran groups in distributing poppies.
Yeah, and Colin, before the poppy became this unifying symbol, the veteran world after the Great War was anything but unified, as you mentioned in the preamble to this episode. So I guess we kind of take it for granted that now it is the Legion that is the unified voice for veterans, but it wasn't always so, was it?
Yeah, and even today, arguably, the Legion, there's a lot of younger veterans who, in particular, who feel that the Legion does not represent them. And you see all these different
Mm-hmm.
splinter groups and things going off and doing stuff. We'll talk about that a little bit
Mm-hmm.
further on. But I mean, I just
Mm-hmm.
saw there's a new initiative for Balkans 35. It's the 35th anniversary of the outbreak of the peacekeeping missions there and all the combat and that stuff. And yet one more entity is starting to do its own thing as opposed to trying to work with the Legion and use the existing networks and all that kind of stuff. And it's interesting. And it was chaos and khaki back then, and I guess it's not khaki anymore, but it's, I guess, chaos and CADPAT.
Yeah.
Every country had its own alphabet soup of ex-soldier groups popping up faster than a corporal could light a cigarette, and not much was changed. Of course, there are still tons of different veteran groups out there, and there's a tendency for a lot of them these days to dress up like biker gangs, which I'm not a big fan of myself. But
Yeah, yeah.
no one ever accused me of being a fashion plate, so I'll let that one go. But there were new ones popping up all the time, and a lot of modern veterans today honestly feel that the Legion doesn't represent them, and that goes way back. I knew World War II veterans who came back from like John McConaughey from the RMR. He'd been wounded at the Battle of Leopold Canal, came back and went to join the Legion and was told he wasn't a real veteran because he hadn't served. Told by some guy from a World War I veteran who probably never even left the UK and went into the trenches.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, McConaughey had been 3 or 4 machine gun bullets through the chest and very lucky to live. But the KVA, the Korean Veterans Association, I don't know if you remember them back in the armory. They'd show up once a month in their green blazers.
Yes.
Well, they only existed because they were deliberately excluded by the Legion. The Canadian Legion
I
would
had
not
no
let them
idea.
join. Yeah, they were not considered real veterans. And
Yes. Well, I
the
guess,
same,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, Korea was considered a police action, so I guess
police action wasn't a real war.
if you're gonna look at the minutiae of those sorts of things, well, you weren't really in a war, were you? It's a police action.
Nothing's changed. Like, your basic training was soft, mine was harder, blah, blah, blah. Everyone always says the same thing. It's the same crap. And it's sad to see that, it continues, but it went way back. Yeah.
Yeah, it's terrible. But in Canada alone, though, immediately following the Great War, it was like a regimental reunion where nobody could agree who was in charge. So many different varying opinions and groups. You had the Army and Navy veterans, very old school. Then the Great War Veterans Association, the Originals Club for the first contingent. The Tubercular Veterans Association, the Amputations Association. Well, even our beloved RMR had the 14th Old Comrades Association.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Toronto club chapter of the 14th.
There was. Yeah, there absolutely was. And I mean, the RMR's 14th Old Comrades Association started in 1919, September 1919, and still exists today as the branch 14 of the Royal Canadian Legion. Yeah, there were so many clubs. You practically needed a trench map just to navigate the politics. And they weren't exactly singing from the same hymn book either. Some wanted cash bonuses, other wanted pensions, some just wanted a little bit of respect.
Yeah.
And of course, like our regiment, the RMR, pretty much every overseas battalion and regiment had their own veterans association. So politically, if you're the federal government, this is a dream scenario for you because there's no one powerful unified voice. When you've got 600,000 men who had been in uniform, 450,000, I think, or whatever, 440,000 had gone overseas in a population of 7 million, that's a massive voting block. And they all have wives and mothers and fathers. It's a huge voting block. So if you can keep them splintered and not singing off the same hymn sheet, that's great for the government.
It's beautiful. Why don't you guys just get together and tell us what you want? I'll wait for your letter. Can you imagine? And you go back to the club in Parliament and say, I took care of that. We won't hear from them again. And in fact, rivalries got so bad that in Toronto, they actually formed a council just to try and make peace between them. The Veterans League of Toronto, basically, can we please stop arguing committee? Perfect conditions for political indifference, as you said, Colin. No unified voice meant no real political pressure. So nothing happens.
What was your fantasy sponsor thing about loudly slurring opinions?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
one thing
Yes.
us veterans love to do. tell everyone about our opinions. But of course, I mean, it's not just in Canada. Meanwhile, south of the border, the Americans were no better. The American Legion, the veterans of foreign wars, and even a few leftover Civil War groups. Because let's face it, it was only 60 years after the Civil War. They were all fighting for the right to represent the veterans' voice. Remember the Daisy Days that I mentioned earlier?
Yeah. So, well, that didn't last long, much like the Daisy Days. The VFW jumped on the poppy bandwagon, patented their own buddy poppy, and basically said, "Thanks for the idea. We'll take it from here." Sounds familiar. Even today, you have the two major groups competing for members: the American Legion and the VFW.
That's right. And Britain itself, who we like to think of, as old school imperialists, as the as the standard we should be following. It wasn't exactly a model of unity either. Before the Royal British Legion came along in 1921, there were a handful of competing associations, all claiming to speak for the lads. Plus, all the regimental associations, like we mentioned, we had in Canada, they had the same ones and probably even had battalion ones. So it was very splintered. Eventually, the UK was pretty successful, though, in merging them all under one big tent.
Right. So when people see the poppy today and think of unity and remembrance, it's worth remembering that back in the 1920s, the veteran world looked more like a political free-for-all.
Yeah, exactly. The poppy didn't just symbolize sacrifice. It eventually became the one thing that all those fractured veteran voices could rally around. So it was a unifying symbol.
Indeed.
And speaking of rallying around, let's rally around our next fantasy sponsor, Armistice Ale. The only brew crafted to keep your poppy pinned on and your stories increasingly heroic.
Famous for its unique blend of barley, hops, and I swear I marched farther than that.
I carried more than you did. Side effects include misty eyes, unsolicited singing, and repeated attempts to give a speech nobody asked for. Yeah, I must clearly drink a lot of Armistice Ale.
Armistice Ale. Raise a glass, honor the fallen, and maybe sit down before you do both.
Kendall tells me that all the time. Sit down before you
sit down.
No one needs to hear your speech.
Excuse me. Well, let's get back to her story about the poppy. So after her success in Canada, Guérin then turned her attention to Great Britain. She arrived in Liverpool on August 30th, 1921, taking examples of her French-made poppies to the British Legion men. She met with Earl Haig, the founder of the British Legion, formed in 1921. Of course, he was Field Marshal Haig, former commander of the British forces, and yes, my editor
he's a very contentious figure, and I'm glad to hear in the background that your cat,
yes,
as soon as you say the word Haig, I think it's a trigger word for your cat.
Well, yes, he does.
He follows the Blackadder version of history, doesn't he?
Yes, he has a very strong opinion about it. And he was persuaded to adopt the poppy as their emblem. Since the Legion was a very poor organization at the time, Guérin personally paid for the first British poppies.
Interesting.
And the British Legion reimbursed her after the first poppy day on November 11th, 1921.
And it wasn't just a couple of poppies that she made and that she funded. The British Legion ordered 9 million poppies that year and sold out almost immediately, raising over £106,000 to help veterans with housing and jobs, which was a massive sum at the time.
Yes, quite amazing. And the success, however, led to some controversy, as always, particularly around who controlled the poppies production and, guess what, the distribution of the funds.
Yeah, keep that part in mind because it's going to get ugly back in Canada as well. We'll get to that. So the primary goal of Guérin's initial campaign was twofold: remembrance and raising funds for French war sufferers. But as soon as the poppy was adopted internationally, the focus kind of started shifting to supporting local veterans, because the local veterans saw this as a great opportunity to have, as we talked about, a rallying symbol or a unifying symbol that they could use to help benefit themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the demand in Britain was so high that Major George Howson quickly set up the Poppy Factory to employ disabled ex-servicemen, ensuring a steady supply for future appeals. Similarly, in 1926, the Lady Haig Poppy Factory was established in Edinburgh to produce poppies exclusively for Scotland, because Sir Douglas Haig, of course, was Scottish.
That's right. And for Canada, the shift was crucial. Although the first Great War Veterans Association Poppy Day used flowers provided by Guérin and manufactured by the women and children of France, Canadian veterans were determined to benefit directly. And so by 1922, the Great War Veteran Association had sourced poppies from a Toronto firm. And by 1923, they partnered with the federal government to use something that was known as, quote, vetcraft, end quote, shops. And if you do a search on Google, go into your Google machine and type in vetcraft, you'll see the little triangle symbol that they had, kind of like a Workers of the World Unite kind of thing, because this was the early 1920s and lots of Marxism and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, Bolshevism rampaging around the world.
Exactly. Yes. So this is kind of cool.
Vetcraft. Good name. Good name. That's probably where Minecraft got it from.
Yeah, I'm sure.
These vetcraft shops were employment schemes specifically run by the Department of Soldiers Civil Reestablishment. So the acronym is DSCR, to employ disabled veterans who couldn't re-enter the general workforce. And God knows there were enough of them.
Yeah.
Sadly. The GWVA willingly paid a higher price for these Canadian-made poppies to ensure employment for wounded veterans and guaranteed that the proceeds assisted Canadian veterans and their dependents. This established a powerful dual significance for the poppy in Canada, remembering the fallen and honoring the living by providing employment and aid.
So wait a minute, you said they were willingly paying a higher price?
Willingly paying a higher price.
Sounds like a government subsidy. No wonder there's tariffs. It all starts there. It's all comes down to that. Yeah. So the Great War Veteran Association itself soon faced some serious trouble.
Of course.
And this, where money gets involved, things can get sticky, right? So by the mid 1920s, there were allegations of mismanagement of funds, including canteen and disablement funds, and accusations that the association held a, quote, quasi-exclusive privilege, end quote, on the sale of artificial poppies in Canada. Ruh-roh, Shaggy. A Senate committee found wrongdoing, accusing the Great War Veterans Association secretary of a breach of trust and ordering the commercialization of poppy sales to be eliminated. They didn't want to see a profit coming from it, which I'm obviously fully in favor of.
Well, imagine if they had social media in those days.
Oof.
So all this happened without the use of social media.
Yeah.
And with its reputation now irreparably tarnished, the Great War Veterans Association, which had been the biggest veteran association in Canada, joined with other groups at a unity conference in 1925 to form the Canadian Legion of the British Empire Service League.
Mm-hmm.
Another good name.
Mm-hmm.
Canadian Legion of the British Empire Service League. So the newly formed Legion, I guess people got tired of saying the Canadian Legion of the British Empire Service League. Especially after
Bit of a mouthful.
Yes, few pints of armistice ale, and forget it.
Let me tell you another thing.
So the newly formed Legion, incorporated in 1926, continued the tradition, emphasizing the flower's dual symbolism of remembrance and veteran employment.
Yes, very important. And this is kind of sad here. Anna Guérin, who was a tireless poppy lady, she gradually faded from the public stage as her international clients, including Canada and Britain and the U.S., all took over local production and charted their own path, which deviated from her original post-war aims, which we remember was to promote remembrance, but also to provide recovery relief and financial relief to the orphans and widows in France. And so by the end of the 1920s, she was largely forgotten. Though we are finally starting to recognize her vital contribution now, Guérin died in Paris in 1961. So we owe it all to her.
We really do. It's very sad because you're quite right. I didn't know about Anna Guérin, and I'm sure the majority of people out there don't, but hopefully we can start bringing her back into the public light. And
for any, RMRs wondering about the connection between our own beloved Sue Guérin, who is the president of the RMR Association, Branch 14, no, they're not related. But Sue and George Goyer have been running a phenomenal poppy campaign for us for the last 10 years. So
yeah, they're doing a marvelous job.
There's still Guérins involved.
Yes, and that's always an important thing. And that brings us to the present day, the enduring consequence of these efforts around the world.
That's right. The red poppy remains a humble, poignant symbol of remembrance and a hope for a peaceful future. It honors those who served to defend our democratic freedoms and way of life. And today, it's distributed and worn differently across the Commonwealth and the United States, usually under the auspices of a national veterans organization that uses the proceeds for charitable support.
So let's look at our three key nations, starting with Canada and the Royal Canadian Legion. So in Canada, the poppy is the official symbol of remembrance, adopted in 1921. Canadians generally begin wearing the poppy on the last Friday of October leading up to November 11th, though you may see people wearing it earlier and you may see people wearing it after. I, for one, do continue to wear the poppy a little bit after November 11th, I have to admit. So the Royal Canadian Legion suggests the poppy be worn on the left lapel as near the heart as possible. The current Canadian poppy design has 4 petals, a black center, and no leaf. The Legion has trademarked the image to ensure it is not used for commercial, political, or dishonorable purposes. All donations collected go into the Poppy Trust funds held at the branch level to directly support veterans and their families with various needs, including financial distress, medical equipment, and long-term care. Important to note that the Dominion Command of the Royal Canadian Legion has registered the trademark of the poppy image to safeguard the poppy insignia as a symbol of remembrance. The people of Canada also provided enhanced protection to the poppy insignia as a protected mark through an Act of Parliament in 1948. So something that I always try and do is encourage people, when the time comes around, to get a poppy, make the donation, because that money really is going to help veterans in need and their families and their dependents. And the other thing also, there's been sometimes I've heard some stories of some people taking offense at people wearing the poppy not in the right place. If you choose to wear the poppy somewhere else rather than close to your heart, there have been some instances where they've been taken to task with that. My personal opinion on that is, if you're wearing the poppy, that's already something important, and that's
I
something
think if people go back to our last episode, they'll see you and I wearing them on our hats.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
so, I mean,
Yeah.
whatever, we're wearing
Yeah.
a poppy.
You're
Give
wearing
us
a
break
poppy.
here.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to note that in Canada, I can speak with the experience of I've been the chairman of a poppy campaign for a few years in the past, and the rules and regulations about the dispensement of the funds is very, very clear. And the interesting thing is, it can only be used for supporting veterans and or their dependents, their direct dependents, and it's all run, as you mentioned before, about the local branch level. So it's all staffed by volunteers, so there's no overhead. You're not paying any salaries, you're not paying any of that stuff. So the Poppy Fund, if you're donating $2 or $5, whatever it is, you can be sure that pretty much 95, 96, 97, 98% of that is going directly to the charitable purpose. So that's important. So
That is important, yeah.
And I think let's next up, let's consider the United Kingdom, which is represented today by the Royal British Legion and Poppy Scotland. So there's two different entities in the UK. So the RBL, the Royal British Legion, distributes poppies in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the poppy traditionally has 2 red paper petals mounted on a green plastic stem with a single green paper leaf and a black center. And I think they, like Canada, the Canadian poppy has been moved to a biodegradable material. So if you've been buying any poppies in the last year or two, they're biodegradable. And I think the UK is going away from plastic as well. So poppies are widely worn from late October until mid-November every year, just like in Canada. And the funds raised support the armed forces community through services like a helpline, recovery courses, care homes, and financial assistance. Now in Scotland, poppies are manufactured and distributed separately by the Earl Haig Fund, Poppy Scotland. These poppies are noticeably different. They are curled, have 4 petals, and notably no leaf, kind of like the Canadian one. These are still made by hand by disabled ex-servicemen at Lady Haig's Poppy Factory in Edinburgh.
Quite incredible. Quite incredible indeed. And so finally, we move to the United States, where the tradition originated with, as we mentioned earlier, Moina Michael.
Mm-hmm.
So the American Legion Auxiliary and the Veteran of Foreign Wars, the observance of Remembrance in the U.S. is focused on National Poppy Day, registered trademark, National Poppy Day, because we are in the United States, which is Friday before Memorial Day, not registered, late May. The red poppy symbolizes sacrifice and honors those who served and died in all wars. The poppy is distributed by the American Legion family, led by the American Legion Auxiliary, are handmade by veterans as part of their therapeutic rehabilitation, which is something quite commendable. Proceeds support veterans, active duty military, and their families with medical and financial needs. A separate organization, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, also distributes the poppy, which they patented, as we mentioned earlier, as the Buddy Poppy in 1924, but is also made by disabled veterans.
Yeah, Buddy Poppy, the name is, I got to say, it's growing on me. I like it. Buddy Poppy. I'm with it.
But better than Daisy Days.
Daisy Days. Yeah, that's reminds me. Anyway, I won't get into that.
Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
What's fascinating here, though, Rejoy, is that while the calendar date and the exact design might differ, from the Canadian black center with no leaf to the British design with a leaf to the Scottish four-petal version, the core intention remains the same: remembrance of sacrifice and dedication to supporting those who served.
Yeah, Colin, it's a powerful analogy. Think of the red poppy as a seed of memory planted on the battlefield by John McCrae's grief. Moina Michael provided the initial sunlight and water, and it was Anna Guérin, the tireless poppy lady from France, who provided the fertile ground, ensuring that this delicate symbol was cultivated and propagated internationally by veteran organizations like the GWVA, the RBL, and the ALA.
Do you have any more acronyms that you like to use?
RCMP,
LMNOP,
LMNP, ABC, DEF,
1, 2, 3,
CEF, BEF.
All right, we're supposed to be serious here. This is supposed to be about poppies and remembrance. Come on, man. Over the last century, that single seed has grown into a global field, tended differently by each nation, yet all bearing the same message. We will remember them.
Yeah, and that's a perfect way to end this episode, I think.
That wraps up our look at the history of the poppy. Hopefully you learned something new, and thank you for joining us for the Rum Ration podcast. Please be sure to like and subscribe. As we're dedicating all of our November episodes to remembrance, our next episode, which will be number 30,
Number 30. Wow.
Number 30 will be all about the unknown soldier.
Yes, so if you want to learn more about the incredible history of the poppy, and it really is quite an incredible history, check out our show notes. Until next time, we raise a glass to the courage and camaraderie of all who have served.
Cheers to history.
Cheers to history.